Now that we have learned how speech production works, let's come to the hearing system. I will start with the ear. So what is hearing? Hearing is actually the sensation of oscillations in a physical medium, for example, the air molecules, but also this could work in water as well. The ear itself is a sensory organ that does not cover what we typically consider to be the ear, but also the auditory nerve and the auditory cortex, which is part of the brain. Let's define what an auditory event actually is. So an auditory event is a perception which is related to a sound event. And this means we have a really distinction between the two. So there could be sound events which are too low in intensity or too different in the frequency spectrum so that humans can actually not perceive them. And also the other way around. There might be auditory events that have no sound event beforehand, for example, when you have a tinnitus. This is related to the capabilities of the human ear and the human sound perception. For example, typical healthy adults have a frequency range that we can perceive between 16 and 20, or let's say rather 16 kilohertz. But I will come to this a little bit later. Here is a scheme of the ear. And we have actually three parts which we can distinguish. So there is the outer ear. The outer ear consists of the so-called pinna that you can see here, and the ear canal until the eardrum. The main function of this outer ear is to capture the sound information and carry them and transport them to the middle and inner ear. And a really important function of this outer ear is directional hearing. I will talk about directional hearing at the end of this week's content. The second part is the so-called middle ear. And these are basically the three tiny bones that we have, which are called ossicles. They transport the sound wave from the eardrum, here over the three ossicles, to the inner ear, to the so-called oval window. The main function of the middle ear is impedance matching. The problem that we have is that in the outer ear, we have air as a medium, and this means that we have low pressure, but in the inner ear here, we have a liquid as medium. And if we would have a direct connection between the outer ear and the inner ear without the middle ear, then the sound wave would actually just reflect and come back and would not be transported any further. So the inner ear is basically the so-called cochlea and the auditory nerve until the auditory cortex. The main function of it is a kind of Fourier-like analysis of the frequency components of a sound. I will come to this in just a second. So let's start with the outer ear. The outer ear consists of the pinna, and you can see that there are some special morphological aspects here. So we have some valleys and some mountains, and all these different parts might resonate concerning or dependent on the direction of the sound source. The ear canal has a length of 25 millimeters, and this is important because it is actually the quarter wave of a wavelength of the resonance frequency of this ear canal. This means roughly a frequency of 3.5 kilohertz is the resonance frequency, and we will encounter this resonance frequency a little bit later on. The main function of the outer ear, of course, is that it acts as a directional filter. According to these special morphological aspects of the ear canal and the pinna, we have a directional dependent resonances which filter actually the sound according to the source of the origin of the sound. Here you can see for different frequencies the pinna here and the ear canal, and whether there is a positive resonancy or a damping of these frequency aspects, frequency components. And as you can see, according to the ear canal resonancy between 3 and 5 kilohertz, we have actually an amplification of these frequency components due to the length of the ear canal. The middle ear consists solely of the 3 bones, these small bones called ossicles, or hammer, anvil, and stirrup. These are the 3 ossicles. What you can see here is the eardrum of the outer ear, which has a big surface area, and the function of the middle ear is to reduce this surface area, the pressure, to reduce this surface area to a smaller surface area at the inner ear, at the so-called oval window. And this increases the intensity, the pressure, and therefore adapts to the liquid which we have in the inner ear. There are also 2 muscles, and both muscles put a tension on the appropriate bones that are adapted or connected here. In this case, the musculus tensor tympani actually stretches or puts tension on the eardrum, which leads to a stronger reflection of the sound wave. So this protects a little bit from high intensity noises. The same is true for the musculus stapedius. This one twists a little bit how the stirrup pushes or presses on the oval window, also reducing the amount of intensity, and thus protects the inner ear from too high intensities or too much noise. This is actually related or operated by a reflex. That means if we encounter too high intensities, too loud noise, then this happens automatically. The inner ear is the cochlea. This is only this one. These other parts are related to the balance sense, the balance modality. If we enroll this inner ear a little bit, then we see that it actually consists of 3 kinds of membranes. So the first one is here, this is filled with liquid, and here the sound as a wave in liquid, a traveling wave, passes through this part, and at the apex it encounters or entrances the second membrane here, and between the 2 we have a third kind of membrane. I will talk about these in detail on the next slides. So we start with the oval window and we end up in the round window. And this round window is closed by a flexible membrane which acts to equalize the pressure of the liquid that we have. Functionally, this cochlea, or the middle membrane, does something like location or place transformation. That means we have a frequency component in the sound, which is now traveling wave in water. In this frequency, information is transformed to a place information on the so-called basilar membrane. And the green scheme that you see here is the basilar membrane, and as you can see, it has different shapes and widths and stiffnesses, and this is the beginning of the oval window, and this is changing in its characteristics to the apex and then back, of course, and this is where the basilar membrane is sensitive to different frequency components. That means at the beginning of the cochlea, at the oval window, the basilar membrane is sensitive for very high frequency components, and the closer we get to the apex, the sensitivity reduces to lower frequencies. This is also illustrated on the next slide, where we have the distance from the oval window or from the stapes as a function of the frequency of a sound. And as you can see, lower frequency components or lower frequency sounds are exciting the far end to the apex, and the higher the frequency becomes, the closer we get to the oval window. And this actually means that high frequency components and complex sounds with high intensity are all stimulating the basilar membrane at the oval window, at the beginning of this pathway. And this is the reason why in over age or with a lot of noise that we encounter, our sensitivity for the higher frequency regions decreases after a while. Now let's come to the details of the actually sensory organ around the basilar membrane and in the cochlea. So we have the so-called scala vestibuli, which is from the oval window to the apex, and then coming back the scala tympani from the apex to the round window. And the second membrane, if we could call this, in between is the scala media. And actually this tiny membrane here is called the basilar membrane. And this moves according to the frequency of the traveling wave. And it's connected to the nerve, the auditory nerve. What we have here are inner hair cells and outer hair cells. The main idea of how this auditory perception now works is that the tectorial membrane is rather fixed. And in relation to the tectorial membrane, the inner hair cells and the outer hair cells move, caused by movements of the basilar membrane. And because this area here is filled with ions, we have a chemical stimulation of the cells, which then send information or which then trigger information to the brain. So how do these hair cells fire and when do they do that? Again, we have the scala vestibuli and the scala tympani and this membrane, the basilar membrane, so this scala media, which is the part in the middle. And if we have a look here, so we have outer hair cells and inner hair cells. The inner hair cells, we don't have that many of them, but they are the important ones who actually fire towards the brain when there is, at this location, a stimulation of the basilar membrane. That means if there are frequency components which are related to these hair cells. So about 90% of these hair cells are sending information to the brain. The other 10%, and especially 90%, roughly 90% of the outer hair cells are receiving information. So they are not sending them. This is an active amplification mechanism because they receive information and amplify mechanically by movements the stimulation of this whole area which is related to a certain frequency.